Good. And a little fake out. It's been a long time since we've tried to get on and it wouldn't let us.
All right.
It's like we're on.
Yeah. See, a couple people show up.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be nice to sit outside. I'm a little bit warm.
You're already getting hot out there.
Yeah, sort of this part of me on this side, the sunny side. We've got this nice, we've got this patio and or like deck furniture out here, but we've never had an umbrella. Should probably get one.
Yeah.
The table's got like a hole for an umbrella, but just haven't done it.
You would reposition only slightly. It would look like the tree is just emanating from your head. There you go. That's pretty good. No, go the other way. There you go. Like you're almost perfectly lined up right on the
Yeah. All right. Looks like there's some folks here. Thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to be in 3rd John, the 3rd letter that John wrote. And we'll be finishing up discussing the letters of John with this session. I'll have something to say at the end. We'll have a couple things to say at the end about what we were thinking about doing next, or if any of you have some requests, we might consider that. But at least for today, we're going to read this short, important letter. It has a couple of great lessons, I think, centered mainly around personalities and relationships and people. I will say though that I think this is a fitting last letter that John writes, because as we've been looking at his writings, we've noticed a little bit about how he's changed as a person from the time he first met Jesus. And I actually think this letter has a little bit to do with some things that John struggled with when he was first with Jesus. And we're going to see maybe John saw a little bit of himself in Diotrephes. I don't know, when his attitude towards people he didn't know or people that were strangers to him wasn't the best. But he's grown over the years with Jesus as somebody who's more loving, more interested in building people up than tearing people down. And I think this letter is going to address some of that. So you want to add anything before we jump into it?
It's also a perfect cap because it gives a very real life version of a lot of the principles from 1st and 2nd John. Okay. I've never done this before, but I've actually thought maybe the next time, if like in a church setting, I'm teaching John's letters, I think I might do 3rd John first as like an introduction, just to say like, this is all the stuff we're about to talk about. In our case, all the stuff we have talked about for the past few weeks. This is why it matters. This is where it shows up. All the principles about love and walking in the light and how we treat each other and how we view ourselves and God. It has real life implications. And this letter really hits on that, I think, which is pretty helpful.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because I think everybody who reads this that's lived for a little while or been members of, different congregations, they're going to see things they've seen before. We're going to see some attitudes in here that really make a distinguishing feature between the people that really love God and the people that don't, people that are doing it right, people that aren't. But like you said, this is the manifestation of the teaching that John's been giving. I like that. All right, I'll go ahead and read it and we'll go ahead and get into it. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. For I was very glad when brethren came and testified to your truth, that is, how you are walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they are strangers. And they have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support such men, so that we may be fellow workers with the truth. I wrote something to the church, But Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words. And not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either, and he forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself, and we add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had many things to write to you, but I am not willing to write them to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we will speak face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends by name.
Gaius is great.
Mm-hmm.
I've always forget about him, on the list of like great Bible characters, especially once you cycle through Jesus and the apostles, like Barnabas, some of the big names. Gaius is so great. And I love, this is another, First John began with that statement about, hey, the fellowship that we have with the Father, I'm writing these things so that we'll have that fellowship so that our joy may be full.
Mm-hmm.
Second John ended with, hey, I want to come see you so that our joy may be full. And here he has another statement about the joy of God's people working with God together, where he says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in truth. So many of these letters, which have had some challenging and hard things, this has been a great reminder for me that this is so crucial for joy. And I think about these days, I think a lot of us are, I guess I can speak for myself, I'm getting a gut check on where do I derive my joy, because a lot of things that I enjoy that I would normally think of as being sources of joy haven't been as available to me. These letters have helped me to think a little bit more about the things that really lead to true joy and the way that we foster relationship with God and with each other to have that kind of joy. But I love that that's kind of his summation of what Gaius means to him as he lays out some of the great things about Gaius.
Yeah, very good. It's interesting to me that he's talking about like hearing about Gaius walking in truth, and he's excited about that. And yet this letter doesn't really address anything about specific doctrines concerning, like, you don't see him saying like, because you accept that Jesus came in the flesh, because you accept, he doesn't really go through that. Now, I'm sure he has some of that in mind, and that Gaius wasn't believing or teaching something false. But what this is actually about was these guys were either walking in truth or not walking in truth based on how they were being loving and hospitable to those that were coming in. And I think we just need to remember that's just as important, that's just as much a part of truth as the doctrines that exist. By the way, I'm in the north, so there's geese flying over. It's winter's coming and the geese are telling us. So
Signal.
that's what that is. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to make that point.
Yeah. It's almost like a way that we would probably say this is like, I'm so thankful, I'm so joyful that you are true. You're a real one. Is the way some people would say it now. Like you really are faithful to God, and you treat people the way you ought, and all that sort of thing. I'm also amazed by verse 2, what it says about Gaius, this man who was true, this man who was a source of joy. I don't know who I first heard say this, but it stuck in my mind that this is an amazing thing, that if someone were to say to you, hey, I pray that your whole life, like your body, you prosper as much as your soul prospers. That would be a really interesting thing if God actually did this, that depending on what the condition of your soul was, that would manifest in your physical body or in your bank account or in your work life or your nation or your neighborhood or whatever. If God actually did that, actually there are a lot of times when God would do that. He would punish people with diseases because they were disobedient or whatever. But this is amazing because John's so confident in Gaius's soul and his devotion to God. He says, I wish your health would prosper, your body would prosper just as much as your soul prospers. That's an amazing compliment and really encouraging.
I think it's amazing simply because any other time you see something like this in scripture, it's the opposite. Right. When Peter wrote, he was like, okay, ladies, like, I know you want to look good on the outside, and I know you're working hard at looking good on the outside, but make sure that you take care of your inside. Paul would write things about bodily exercise profits a little,
Mhm.
But I think I know way more people that what I wish I could say to them, or I probably even do kind of hint at it, is, hey, you're working so hard on your health. You're eating the right foods, you're intermittent fasting, you're like working out, like you're doing all the right things for your body. I wish your soul was that healthy. I wish you were giving that much attention to that. So it is cool to see the opposite of this, um, where somebody can just be said, hey, you've got it going right inside, and I hope the rest of your life follows along with that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a good lesson here, I think, that if we could have this as our aspiration and that it would define us, it's not just gonna be good for us. There's an infectious quality to it. The impression I get in verse 3 is that it's like everybody just couldn't help talking. Like, man, have you heard about what's going on with Gaius? Here's all the stuff that he's doing. I'm so encouraged by him. He's an amazing brother in the Lord. All this kind of stuff. Um, there's an infectious quality that other people just have to talk about what's going on, but it's not even something that's for you. It gives joy to others whenever they see God's work in our souls and in our lives. Whenever we're living in the right way.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple of hints here at maybe what he was doing for these traveling brethren, traveling teachers, whoever they were that he was showing hospitality to. Verse 5, my version says, you're acting faithful in whatever you accomplish for the brethren. And you kind of wonder, like, what did he accomplish? Was it just, hey, it's great to see you, we're really glad you're here? Or was it, hey, here's a room to stay in, and let me make sure that you're taken care of? And I think we can learn a lot about what genuine hospitality is. I
Yeah.
think, there's a lot of churches I've visited before. One of the things I do when I go do meetings is, if people don't really know me or know what I look like, I don't necessarily introduce myself right away as like the preacher. I just kind of come in, and it's interesting to see how people treat me differently when they know who I am. Um, but every once in a while you run into people that they don't know who you are, but they're interested in making sure that you're taken care of,
Yeah.
in multiple ways. And I think that shows the real spirit of God. But verse 5 talks about accomplishing things. Verse 6 talks about sending them on their way in a manner worthy of God. I'm curious what you think that might mean. Like, what would be the appropriate way to send people on in a manner worthy of God? Um, and then verse 8 talks about supporting those people, and how we ought to support them. But you got thoughts on the specifics of that?
Um, it seems to me that Gaius was living out what John wrote about in 1 John 3, starting in verse 16. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. So, I mean, I take this to be that sending them in a manner worthy of God was, one, supporting and embracing them on a relational level. You're preaching the gospel. You're going out for the name of Jesus. I'm on your side.
Right.
But it sounds to me like there were tangible. Maybe it was financial. Maybe it was housing. Maybe it was providing transportation. Maybe it was providing some sort of, I don't know, people. Maybe he had people in his household that he would send to go with these guys to be their coworkers and partners. I don't really know, but it sounds like he was doing that thing that John said in 1 John 3 of we need to use our goods to support the brethren. That's the way I read it.
I think it's tough. I think it's tough for us to imagine. We live in such a time with such prosperity. Most people that come into our churches or come into town or whatever, sure, they've got their vehicle maybe, or they've got their stuff. But if you say, like, okay, well, what don't you have? Do you need a bed to stay in? Usually they're like, well, no, like I got a hotel, or my company's taking care of it, or we saved our money up for this trip, or there's just like, I think it's harder and harder in our time to really even understand what it would be like to take somebody in, and how long they would have to take them in, and what they would have to do to help them get settled in a place that they weren't used to. I think people like you and I've been places who understand what it's like to travel internationally to places that are poor, maybe understand this a little bit better. Like, what would they do to help? They can't just cut a check, to pay for something. So maybe that just means we need to be more thoughtful and creative how we build each other up.
Yeah, I think so. Whatever it was, I mean, he saw his brethren as his life was their life. Their challenges were his challenges. Their burdens were his burdens, and he was ready to take those on, which is exactly what the love of Christ should compel us to do.
Right.
And like you said, I think you're right. We got to be more creative about it. Who knows? And I'm not at all any kind of global financial expert or anything, but you know, at some point you would think a lot of stuff's going to get weird and messed up financially, and some of us are going to have a lot and some of us aren't, or some of us aren't going to have a lot, but we are going to have more than somebody else.
Right.
I remember years ago hearing somebody say, it was an older preacher, and he was saying the collection in the New Testament was the collection for the needy saints. That was what it was for.
Right.
And usually now when we think about a collection, and this isn't all bad, and it's actually, there's a lot of advantages to it. We think about it in supporting preachers. I know I'm very grateful for that. I wouldn't be able to be here and serve as we are if it wasn't for churches doing that. But eventually it may be that our collections are much more,
right,
almost exclusively to provide for the needs of the saints. And this is a good example of somebody who did that, and he gets as high a praise of anybody in any apostolic writing. This guy gets some amazing praise for that.
You even notice that most of the time John's referring to people as children, and like he's their father. Mm-hmm. Here he's talking to Gaius like he's a peer, like you're my beloved, you're my friend. I think some versions even translate like my good friend,
and verse 8 even says we ought to support such men so that we may be fellow workers. And I know the fellow workers are like the truth, but it's you and me both. Me, the aged Apostle John, and you, Gaius, the guy who has a house or has a horse or has whatever he had that he was using for his brethren. Right. We are co-workers with the truth. Yeah, you're right. Like that exalted thing.
Good. All right. So then let's talk about the contrast in that church with Diotrephes.
This is where the bad music plays. Dun, 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 like.
That's right. Is the implication of verse 9, is it basically that Diotrephes like tore the letter up? Is that what you read there? Like, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, doesn't accept what we say. Or, maybe even Diotrephes got it and he was like, now listen, we're not going to listen to these guys. This is our church. And so we're not going to accept the authority of these fellows.
That's pretty good. I've never imagined him tearing it up, but that's probably is. I guess I've always imagined somebody got the letter, they went up and they read it, and then Diotrephes got up and was like, well, that's all nice, but like you're saying, we'll think about all this and we'll just keep on doing things the way we think. Whatever it was, he obviously totally he is a perfect example of what John is warned about in his first letter. There's some who would say they are of us, but they are not of us. Like Diotrephes is going to really say, yeah, apostle, nice, but no thanks. Right. Don't listen to him. That is the spirit of Antichrist that he's been talking about in the past couple of letters.
Yeah. So when he threatens in verse 10 to bring it, if he comes, he's going to bring attention to his deeds. But he lists 3 things that Diotrephes did that like get increasingly worse. So verse 10, he unjustly accuses us with wicked words. So first, Diotrephes just badmouths these guys, badmouths the apostles. I think, by the way, we need to be careful of people like that in our congregations. Just speaking evil and speaking bad things, like that kind of gossip and that kind of slander. It's terrible. And you know who those people are. You need, I think, to either call them out or avoid them, not participate in it. But the second thing he does, it says he's not satisfied with this. He doesn't receive brethren. And I think the idea would be these traveling folks. Like, oh no, I'm going to be skeptical of you. I'm not going to let you be a part of this. And then when he says, and he forbids those who desire to do so, I think some versions say he even would forbid others who wanted to help them, like the people who were trying to be hospitable. He would like shut that down. And then just and then puts them out of the church. I've wondered what all that looked like specifically, and maybe that's what John's saying. When he gets there, he'd say like, hey, here's specifically what you've done. But anyway, those are progressively worse kinds of violations.
Yeah, yeah, he's not just personally opposed to it. He's wrecking this place.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of it comes back to what it said about him in verse 9. I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them. You mentioned, I don't know which story you were thinking about, with like maybe when John looked at Diotrephes, he saw some things like, oof, I know how bad that is. I guess the story that I think about with this is the story where John and his brother James came to Jesus, or got their mom to go to Jesus and say, hey, can we have the best seats in your kingdom? One on your right, one on your left. And that was, of course, such a pivotal moment. It's right before Jesus enters Jerusalem. It's right before Jesus would go to the cross. And I know those words must have been just burned into John's heart forever. Whenever Jesus asked, are you willing to drink the cup? And at first he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the implication is, I'm very happy to drink a king cup, you know? But then he eventually found out what cup Jesus was really talking about. And that was the cup of suffering and sacrifice and sacrificial love and selflessness and all that stuff. And he sees in Diotrephes, man, you've totally, totally, totally missed the point. The Jesus who, John 13, gets down with the towel and washes the feet of his disciples and says, you guys just need to love one another just like I've loved you. Diotrephes, you've totally missed it. Jesus was always telling us to not try to be first, to not try to be the big dog, just to be more like Gaius, to serve and to love and to give. You've totally missed the point of what the church even is. The church is supposed to be a family of love and sacrifice under the Lord who sacrificed himself. And Diotrephes had totally missed that. And that's what led to all these other horrible things that he was doing.
Yeah, very good. I was even thinking further back with John, when he and his brother wanted to call down fire on the Samaritans, just like sort of the xenophobia, like in this book, you see that you had people like Gaius and others who people would come in and be like, hey, I don't really know who you are, but I'm going to be kind to you and try to bring you in and try to be accepting. I think of Barnabas with Saul, when Saul became a Christian. I think a lot of us tend to be afraid of people that we don't know. And like you said, John kind of maybe got over that, but then he wrestled with, I need to be first among the apostles. And then, yeah, so great point.
It's just a good warning. If I'm trying to be important, I'm never going to be able to love like Christ. And John learned, I got to stop caring about being important, and I just need to follow after the Lord. And Gaius had learned to not try to be important, but just to serve. But Diotrephes still wanted to be important, to be, the man, to be the one that everybody looked up to or whatever. And he was missing the point.
Yeah, very good. Good. So you seem to like Demetrius. You want to say something about him?
I just think, I just wonder about him. He was obviously a great man. The way I read it is that he was either someone who was coming, and that John knew Diotrephes would reject, and he wanted Gaius to receive.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he was somebody there in the church who had been put out. Maybe I could imagine Gaius is there doing all this good stuff, and John's like, Gaius, keep it up. I'm so proud of you. You give me joy. I'm so glad we're working together. But he knows that maybe Demetrius had gotten put out of the church for doing the same kinds of stuff. And now he's worried that Gaius is going to be like, I don't know, man, I should probably back off. Diotrephes going to put me out. And if he puts me out, what good can I do? Maybe I should just pull back a little bit, hold up, whatever. I don't know that, but I think that is something that can happen. Whenever you see good people do good and they kind of get punished for it, there's a temptation to say, let me pull back a little bit. Right. And Diotrephes type people can do that. They can mess up people in a church or mess up Christians in general who are trying to do good. And whether Demetrius was somebody who was coming and John just wanted Gaius to receive him, or if Demetrius was somebody in the church who Diotrephes had put out, either way you go, I think this is an exhortation to Gaius. Don't be intimidated by the people who act like they're important and aren't people who love in the truth. You keep on doing right, people like Demetrius even.
Yeah, very good. And verse 11 is actually kind of the instruction, right? So in verse 11, when he says, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Like I know that's a really simple thing to say, but I mean, just think about that. Like in any given congregation of people, we can watch and look and see the fruit, see the testimony surrounding them. I like in verse 12, there's like 3 things that testify about Demetrius. He's like, everybody says good stuff. the truth itself testifies, and we add our testimony, like, here's your 2 or 3 witnesses about Demetrius. But the main calling here is find these examples and live like them and act like them and be like them. Yeah, maybe Demetrius, or I'm sorry, maybe Diotrephes had more control in that church. Maybe Diotrephes had some weird vibe, where people looked up to him because he was such a strong character or whatever. I've seen churches like that. Just don't be afraid to reject that and say, like, yeah, that's not who I'm going to be.
And it's also interesting to me that John doesn't encourage Gaius, because I think when you're in those situations and you can see it, you see, like, man, that's messed up. This not great. This person with a not great attitude, somebody who wants to be the important person first among everybody else. They're controlling things. They're messing up things that should be done right. There's a temptation to kind of fight fire with fire. Well, like, I need to make sure to let people know that I'm right, and like serving is better and all this kind of stuff. He doesn't say to mount some sort of counterattack against people who are doing wrong. You just keep doing good. And the more you do good, that will win the day eventually. At least it'll win the day before God. And you may lose the day in your local church or with certain people or whatever, but just keep on doing what's good. No matter the consequences, no matter the responses, no matter if you think it's working or not, just keep on doing good and let God do something with that.
Yeah, great. So, he does the same thing at the end of the letter that he did in the last one about, like, hey, I've got a lot more stuff to say, but I want to see you face to face. I don't want to just keep writing about this. Again, I just think we should highlight that's the goal. The goal is we need to be people who have the kind of relationships that aren't just talking to each other over social media or, writing things back and forth, but like genuine sort of human experience stuff. I think people are getting more and more out of touch with that generationally anyway. I know some young people that have a really hard time just knowing how to even have a conversation, if it's not through a phone or if it's not through text. But it's probably even getting more difficult, with things now. And I'll just say, when he says in verse 15, the friends greet you and greet the friends by name. It's an interesting thing to say. Kind of interesting because in the last letter he wrote, he was doing like the whole elder to the chosen lady. He doesn't use any names, but now he's like, use names. But anybody that's in maybe a larger congregation or congregation that's changing rapidly knows how difficult that is to actually even remember everyone and remember everybody's names and like get to know them a little bit. That implies you have to take time to spend time with them and get to know them. And anyway, I just think it says a lot about how close we need to be.
Yeah. One of the things that I heard somebody point out one time that made me think about friendship in a different way too. This word friend in Greek, which I'm not a Greek person, but I can just hear what other people say sometimes, is the word philos, which is, a cousin of phileo, love, in other words. So one way to read this is the people who love greet you, greet the people who love by name. And that should be who we are, that we're friends, that we love. And I think it can expand our view of friendship. I should love all, so I should be a friend to all. Diotrephes wasn't. Demetrius apparently was. Gaius certainly was. Most of all, Jesus was, in laying down his life for his loves, his friends. That's what he said he did. And we got to learn to do that. And it expands it out to where friendship isn't defined by shared interest necessarily, or age, or any of that kind of stuff. Friendship is defined by that we love God and that we love one another and that we love whoever we can. And I think that's just to add on to what you were saying, we need to express that love in meaningful ways.
Yeah, Charity just made a comment on here about she likes that it ends with the idea of peace in a book that's about conflict.
It's a great point.
And how much, how relevant is that, like, right now? Like, division is so real right now, within politics, within the way people think about how things are going on. I don't anticipate getting it getting much better in the next couple months or 4 years or whatever. I think Christians just need to lead the way. And where does this come from? I would just say our our understanding of who we are in Christ, the security we have, because as the beginning of this letter says, our soul prospers.
Yeah.
So what if finances are falling apart? What if health isn't going well? What if the nation's crumbling? Our souls are prospering. We're in a good place. God's given us great joy. We shouldn't be afraid of strangers, of people we don't know. We shouldn't be afraid of like all the things. Just continue to love and show hospitality and kindness and be peaceful. And how winsome is that anyway in a world where nobody trusts anybody? Once people are convinced that your love is genuine and the love of the church is genuine, it'd be hard to keep them away in a world where nobody's treating each other that way.
Amen. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Cool.
So I think that's 3rd John. Did you want to say something about what's coming next?
Yeah. Everybody, feel free to send us a message and let us know if you have an idea for us. Otherwise, we were actually thinking that we'd take a little while to look at the Gospel of Matthew, and especially the teachings of Jesus in Matthew. There's some pretty big teaching sections that are really helpful, and we probably look at some of the stories too that relate to them. But take some time to just follow after Jesus, see what he said, see what he did in the Gospel of Matthew. We also thought as a fallback, maybe doing the Book of Romans, but we kind of were leaning more toward doing Matthew. So if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions or just ideas about that, feel free to send us a message and let us know what you think, and we're gonna go from there.
Yeah, and probably not every single thing in Matthew, like you said, but
Yeah.
mostly the sermons of Jesus and maybe the context of those and why they're there. But honestly, that could probably last a pretty long time. So,
Yeah.
but we'd get a pretty broad sort of scope of teaching if we did that too.
Yeah. And one other thing, next week, my family's gonna be moving to another home here in Brooklyn, so I'm not gonna be available. So for the next week, and y'all pray for us to be able to be sane for the next few days as we're trying to throw everything in boxes and get across town and stuff.
So we'll plan to come back with Matthew in 2 weeks or whatever. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
everybody. Love you all.